I'm Sophie, and I used to work at a KFC in a large retail complex. It was open till midnight most nights, and it was the last place open of all the businesses in the area. So when my late shifts were done, there was always a really ominous feeling in the air. The deserted parking lot gave me the creeps. I worked there part-time when I was in college. On one particular night, I was closing the restaurant with a few other coworkers. Just to add some context, we were all girls, and there were 3 of us, including my manager. We turned off the outside lights and started to tidy up the kitchen and dining area. When we were about to leave, the restaurant phone rang. It was an eerie sound since we had all just turned off the lights. The only light source was a dim glow coming from the kitchen. My manager picked up the phone, and we all stood around her trying to eavesdrop on the conversation. We heard the crackle of a man's voice on the other end of the line. He said,
"I see you in there,"
among other things, but all I could make out was that. I looked around at my coworkers. We were all visibly frightened, but we tried to stay calm, hoping it was just a prank call. We would get prank calls from time to time, but not usually this late. It was past bedtime for most of the kids that would usually prank us. My manager tried to ask the man who he was and what he wanted, but he didn't answer. When my manager hung up the phone, we heard a loud thud coming from the front door. We all jumped, and my manager quickly ran to the front to check what was happening. She looked out the large window, and I followed. There was a man wearing a plaid button-down shirt standing outside the door with his back to us. We couldn't see his face, but he looked like a neat and tidy guy. Not the type you would expect. His hair was thinning at the top, and his hands were in his pockets. My manager quickly made sure the door was locked and told us to call the police. I dialed 911, and within minutes, a police car arrived. We could see the flashing red and blue lights in the dining room where we waited. As we watched through the window, we could see the police officer approach the man and started talking to him. The man turned around, and we could see his face for the first time. He had a stern expression on his face, and he looked right at me. The police officer spoke to the man for a few minutes. We couldn't tell what they were saying, but it looked like the officer was telling him to leave. The man simply walked away. Then the police officer came into the restaurant to talk to us. He asked us if we knew the man, or if we'd seen him before. We all shook our heads, and we said we had no idea who he was. That was when the police officer told us something really creepy. He told me that the man said he was Sophie's father, and he was there to pick her up after work. I told him that was not my father, and that I'd never seen the man before. I had no idea how he even knew my name. It must have been a sick joke, I thought. After the police took off, we locked up the restaurant and left. We were all really shaken up, and we couldn't stop talking about what had just happened. The next day, we talked to the other employees who'd worked the previous late shift, but none of them had seen the man or heard anything strange. It was like the man only appeared to us. For the next few weeks, we were all on edge whenever we closed. We made sure to double-check all the locks, and always checked outside before leaving. But we never saw that man again. Looking back on that night, I still get chills thinking about what could have happened if we'd gone outside. I still wonder what he wanted, and why he said what he said to the officer. I was disappointed that more couldn't have been done about that guy. I was creeped out about it for a long time, and I wish they could have done something to keep him away from me. I used to be a cleaner for a local shopping mall. I worked at night when the stores were all closed and the shoppers had gone home. It was a quiet job, mostly just me and sometimes a few others. This time it was just me. I would always listen to music or podcasts on my phone while I worked, otherwise the boredom would be too much to handle. One night, I was mopping the floor of a narrow corridor leading to the bathroom. There was an exit nearby and a large glass door. I heard a tapping sound behind me. I turned around and saw a man dressed in a police uniform standing at the glass door. He looked straight at me and then said,
"Let me in. It's an emergency."
I hesitated for a minute. I was shocked to see another person here. It was 1:30 a.m., and I knew no police officer would be at the mall at this hour, especially not tapping on a glass door to be let in. But something about the man's urgent tone made me feel like I should at least hear him out. "Why do you need to come in?" I asked, my hand hovering over the lock.
There's been a break-in at the jewelry store. I need to get in and secure the scene,
he replied. The jewelry store was one of the most valuable stores in the mall. They certainly had a ton of expensive stuff, but if someone had broken in, then I would have thought I would notice. I did have my headphones in, but it's hard to believe that I wouldn't notice. That, and I was pretty sure the jewelry store stashes away all their expensive stuff at night. I didn't think you could just break in and steal stuff. I wasn't buying his story. Something didn't feel right. The man's demeanor was off, too friendly and relaxed for someone claiming to be responding to a break-in. And there was just one officer. Usually there'd be at least a few of them. I didn't even see the guy's car. "I'm sorry, I can't let you in," I said firmly. Then I pulled out my phone to call the police. The man's smile disappeared, replaced by a scowl. He began to bang on the glass door, demanding to be let in, but I knew better than to unlock the door for a stranger in the middle of the night. As I spoke to the police dispatcher, the man eventually gave up and disappeared out of sight. I told them what happened, describing the man and his police uniform as best I could. They assured me that they would send someone to check it out, and then I went to the main entrance to wait. Not more than a few minutes later, 2 police cars arrived. One of the officers stepped out of his car, and as soon as I saw him, I noticed that their uniforms did not match the guy I saw earlier. At that moment, I knew I made the right choice by turning him away. I talked to the police for a few minutes, but they told me there was no report of a robbery at the mall. Further confirmation of what I already knew. The rest of the night passed without incident. I finished my shift as usual, leaving the mall at 6 a.m. As I drove home, I thought about what that guy could have wanted. I figure he just wanted to rob the place, but what would he have done to me? It wouldn't have been good. When I was 20 years old, I used to work at a large grocery store near my house. I was still living with my parents, but I was saving for my own place. The store was open 24/7, and I worked the late shift. The place was always really empty at night. It was just me and another guy stocking shelves. Then there was a single cashier. It was a huge store with about 10 checkouts, so most of the place was really empty. Most nights the only excitement came from restocking the shelves and dealing with the occasional shoplifter. That was really rare though. One night a man came in, and he asked me some strange questions. He was older and had thinning hair. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. I initially thought he was homeless, but when he came close, then I thought he probably wasn't. He asked me if we sold any products that could be used to make explosives. I was taken aback by his question, but I told him that we didn't carry anything like that. He tried to play it off like he was joking, and I actually believed him at first. I shrugged it off as a weird encounter and went back to my work, but later that night, I noticed the same man standing in the parking lot, staring at the store. He didn't seem to be doing anything, just standing there and watching. You encounter all kinds of people at night, but this one really got to me. I tried to make excuses for it. Maybe he was just lost or waiting for someone. But when I took my break and looked out the window, I saw the man was still standing there, watching the store. It was weird. The next night, the man came back. This time he came into the store and asked me some more strange questions. He wanted to know if we had any security cameras, or if the store had any security personnel working. I told him we did, and asked if there was anything else I could help him with. He turned around and walked away without saying anything else. He lingered in the store for a while longer, and then left without buying anything. During my break that night, I looked out the window and saw the same man standing in the parking lot, looking in. I ignored him as best I could, and finished my shift for the night. I was worried that he would still be there when I left for the night, but thankfully, he was gone. I didn't know where he went, or if he was still there, but I was glad I couldn't see him at least. Nothing happened for the next few days. He didn't show. But one night the next week, something strange happened. I finished my shift at 11 p.m. and started walking to my car. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw the same man walking behind me. The parking lot was dark. There were a few other cars around, some customers, and some were probably my coworkers. There were no other people though, just me and that guy. He had a wild look in his eyes, and he was muttering to himself. He got close enough that I could smell him. He started shouting at me and accusing me of weird things, like that I was spying on him. I obviously wasn't. I tried to reason with him, but he wouldn't listen. He pushed me against my car and held me there. He was surprisingly strong. I thought I was going to die right then and there in the parking lot. I managed to squirm free though, and ran back to the store. The guy chased me for a bit, but he was really slow. When I got in, I told the cashier to call the police. When they arrived, the man was gone. I described him to them, and they seemed to know who he was. It turned out he'd been in trouble before. It wasn't the first time he'd attacked somebody. The experience really scared me, but I kept working there for another year and a half after that. I didn't see the man again after that night, though. He never came back to the store, and I was really happy about that. At the time that this incident happened, I had been working at McDonald's for several months. The hours were long and the work was boring. Most nights were uneventful, with only a few customers trickling in here and there. The weekends were usually a little more rowdy, though. A lot of drunk people coming in, and fights would happen often. They were usually not a big deal, but one time a pretty scary thing happened. It was a Saturday night, and I was behind the counter when two customers walked in. At first they seemed like any other customers, just two guys looking for a late night snack. It seemed like they were friends at first, but as they approached the counter, I could sense something was off. They were clearly angry at each other. I didn't care to pay attention to what they were saying, but I could tell they were mad. They continued arguing, and before I knew it, they were shouting at each other. I tried to intervene and calm them down, but it was no use. They were both so angry, and they didn't even seem to hear me. I walked out from behind the counter to try to keep them apart. That was a big mistake, though. Suddenly, one of them pulled out a knife. I had never seen anything like that before, and I had no idea what to do. I walked back behind the counter and called the police, but the men were already in a full-blown fight. I went back out there, still on the phone with the police. I went to try to break them up again, but they were really going at it. I couldn't stop them. I tried to keep my distance, but as I backed away, I felt something sharp scrape against my arm. I looked down and saw that I'd been cut by a knife. It wasn't a deep cut, but still. Then the police arrived and managed to break them up. They arrested both men and took them away, but the damage had already been done. The restaurant was a mess, and there was blood dripping down my arm. The customers who had been in the restaurant at the time fled, and the only people left were the police and me. Two of my coworkers were still in the back. I took the rest of the night off and went to the hospital. Soon after, I quit my job. I couldn't bear the thought of working there anymore, not after what happened. To be honest, I was planning on quitting before that, but this was the last straw. I would have probably stayed for another few months otherwise, but because of what happened, I quit right away. I had to get tested for all kinds of diseases because of the cut to my arm. Luckily, they all came back negative.